Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and this podcast is ranked in the top 2% of the most popular podcasts globally, and it's all because of my guests. I am honored and blessed to share time with people who are at the top of their game, and they show up here willing to help you get to where you want to be in life and in business. My guest today, Dyer, is an internationally recognized keynote speaker, consultant, and expert in company culture, leadership, and remote work. And with a background as a former CEO managing thousands of employees, his companies were consistently named among the best places to work, and he has appeared on Inc. magazine's fastest growing companies list multiple times. Now, Dyer is ranked as the #1 leadership speaker on culture by Inc. magazine and has been recognized as a top 50 global thought leader. He delivers engaging presentations on transforming company culture, leadership development, and optimizing remote work strategies, so important these days, and blending insightful candor with actionable strategies. He also advocates for a 7-pillar strategy, and we're going to be talking about that today. And that strategy emphasizes transparency, positivity, measurement, acknowledgment, uniqueness, listening, and learning from mistakes. Our topic today is Introduction to the 7 Pillars of Company Cultures, and he's going to explain those 7 foundational pillars that he advocates for, and I will be taking a lot of notes. Good morning, Chris. Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. Before you get started, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you show up in the world?
Sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having me on your show. I'm excited to be here. And despite the incoming storm that you may have, hopefully we can have a great conversation. So, in this current moment, I'm kind of in that one of those next phases of life, I guess. I don't know how many we all get or how many I'll get, but I went 20 plus years running an organization as a CEO, and I've just now, after a few years, finally undone all of those little habits, all those little things that you used to doing every single day, running an organization. And I'm now in this kind of new place where I'm consulting and I'm speaking, around the world, a lot in the United States, and talking about culture, helping people get ready for this next wave of innovation and future of work and AI, and just really excited about the ability to kind of go in and help organizations triage where they might be struggling and giving them really practical, tactical things that they can use, not sort of this, academic thing that no one's ever tested that it's the next best buzzword. I'm really into trying to help organizations with things that work.
I totally get what you're saying because, I've been doing this podcast almost 16 years. It's old enough to drive now. It really is. And I've talked with people all over the world in different arenas of business. And one thing that I have really noticed, especially the last 10 years or so, is that culture is important. It didn't used to be, I don't think. I'm not even positive it was even noticed all that much. But, people, and I get this picture in my head, the guy in the corner office in front of a big window over there, and then a, big picture of him, portrait of him looking like a banker above his desk, and he's telling people, do what you're told, nobody gets hurt. That doesn't work anymore, does it?
No, and that was a type of culture. It was very clear on what it was and what they wanted. What we know though is that that's not really how a lot of top organizations were run. That's not how Ford was run. That's not how 3M was run. That's, there's a lot of clear examples even back a long time ago where they were doing things differently. Now, the average organization that probably didn't make it, didn't exist, isn't around anymore. Yeah, that's kind of how they ran things. So, of course, now today we are more aware of these things, and employees have much more perspective and understanding of what's possible. And so there's been a bit of a democratization and information revolution and all of that. And it's allowed people to understand that there's more we can do, and not just like because it helps employees, but because it actually helps the bottom line. It helps the business as well, right? Great culture is good for everyone.
Operations in business now, more so than ever before, I think.
Mm-hmm. You got cut off that very first part. I didn't hear the whole thing that you said. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I'm in the deep south and we're in the middle of hurricane season. We've got a cyclone heading our way, so my internet might be a bit spotty, so I'm sorry for that. But what I was saying is that we have this multi-generational culture right now where you may have 5 generations all working on in the same office, and sometimes that can be a little bit tricky. And I'm wondering if that's also part of the culture that you're talking about.
It is, but we've always had lots of generations in the workplace. In this moment, we may have one extra than back in the past because people are living longer, they're working longer. We've certainly, society has advanced in a way that allows for that maybe it didn't 100 years ago, where you might have been more typical to die at 60 than to keep working until you're 70 or 80. But ultimately, what everyone is struggling with is not actually a generational problem or generational issue. What we're dealing with is that the cycles of change are happening faster and faster. So, you know, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, like what our grandparents or great grandparents, what they might have dealt with as far as change in their lives in the span from the time they were born until they died, they might have dealt with one big improvement, one big change to society. We're now dealing with one big change and one big, society altering moment every 10, 20 years or something. I mean, the cycles have gone down. And so here you have a generation, let's just say millennials, that had cell phones and pagers and things like that, to AI all of a sudden, and while they're still in the workforce, which is a big radical shift. And so what people know, and remember, millennials were the big disruptors to the baby boomers who were teaching them how to use computers and all of this. So like the amount of change has been exciting and huge, but also it really puts a lot of pressure on different types of people who understand different parts of the business and technology and change and tradition and all of that to kind of bump heads.
No, I find it fascinating, and you've mentioned AI, so this is one of the questions I have for you. It's about excuse me, the future of work and the role of AI. What is your perspective on the future of work, especially with the increasing integration of AI? I happen to love it, but I pay attention on Twitter here, there, and yonder, and people are like, oh my God, if you're not, some AI is going to take your job. I don't think that's true. I kind of think somebody that's really well versed in AI might take your job, but we're still humans. What's your perspective?
Well, there's probably a few things there. So the first is if you ignore AI and you don't make any adjustments to your career, and especially if you're going to retire next year, that's different. If you're going to retire in 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, you better understand AI, better know how to use it. I'm not talking about how to program it, but I mean how to prompt it, how to make it a part of your life, how to benefit from it, how to excel from it. That's going to be key, because if you don't do that, yeah, you might lose your job. I mean, we might have, driverless trucks running on AI systems that are delivering everything around the country, and we don't need truck drivers anymore. That's a real possibility. If you are a warehouse worker in an Amazon facility, they're working on robots. They're really close that can pick up these boxes, do this stuff. And the next job is going to be servicing the robots and doing some of the other stuff the robots can't do. But again, that means you better understand how that technology works and better be making adjustments. But for most people, you're right. This is not going to take their job. It should impact their job. It should enhance their job. It should, be something a bit like Microsoft Word when we first got, or it wasn't Microsoft Word. What was it called back? Word Perfect, I think, was the first one that I remember using a long time ago. When we got these tools on the computer, everyone thought it was going to take all these jobs, and all what it ended up doing was just help us do our jobs better. So there is that part of it as well. There are some dangers on AI's horizon, and it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening there. One of those dangers is that Apple's about to launch a brand new phone and a brand new operating system. I think it's iOS 18, and on 18 they're integrating ChatGPT. And so you say, well, what does that mean? Well, you can now, with this new system, go in and type a text message and then just click the little button in the phone and say, rewrite this with ChatGPT to make me sound smarter, make me, check for grammar errors, whatever. And we don't have to take that text, go to another platform. They've integrated it in there into everything. So that's great. We're going to have better communication, better text messages, better everything. But that also might mean that we're going to distrust written communication. There could be a point here where we start to really doubt whether or not someone read the message, whether or not they really sent that message, because they're all using AI. And we might start to overly value a Zoom calls or a phone call or something where we can see the person and we really know that they're saying the thing and they really understand. So the pendulum could swing away from written communication, which is really interesting, and back to, can I see you, hear you, feel you, and know that we are really having a conversation and not just letting our AIs, run amok and communicate with each other while we have no idea what's being said.
Think about that. And I'll tell you why, because my cell phone, I don't use it for business. I flatly refuse to use it for business. So if you want to reach me, you can call my office, call my toll free, and actually speak with me. I'm just a lot more comfortable with that. But I can see, and I see it now, people are saying, did you write this? Are you a bot? What's going on? We're becoming, probably sadly, deeply suspicious of just about everything. I mean, you see images and, instantly people say, oh, that's AI. It may be, it may not be, but how do we know anymore? So we have to be careful, I think, when we're chatting with other people, we're talking with other people, we're commenting on things, that maybe we should do a little bit of homework before we do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
To go back to the top, because when I introduced you saying that you've got these 7 pillars, let's start with those because they're important. And what had you saying, okay, as a CEO, I'm doing this. I know I'm asking 2 questions, so pick one or answer both. But how did you craft these? What happened in your life, in your business, that you said, I've got to do this?
Yeah. So the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 happened, and we were really struggling to survive. We had heavily invested in the vertical of mortgage companies, which for a while was doing great for us until all of a sudden they all went out of business, and they didn't pay their bills and stopped sending us orders. And so it was like, hey, we got to figure this out. And here I am, the only one with all these employees. I'm the only one coming up with ideas. And they're all kind of waiting for me to tell them how we're going to save the business. And I was very frustrated by this. I thought that this was a moment when, I wanted people to step up. And after I got done being frustrated, I realized that I had not created, we started off this way, but we didn't evolve this way as the business grew, that I had not created a culture where people felt safe to give their ideas. They felt encouraged to give their ideas, that we, really pulled that out of them in a healthy way. And so they had essentially been trained that Chris comes up with the ideas, or things flow through Chris. And if Chris doesn't rubber stamp it, or, whatever, then it didn't happen. And I never intended for that to be that way. It just kind of happened on accident, from a lack of planning and the lack of being strategic that way. That's how they felt. And so I went back and said, I got to radically change the culture. And I went looking for the book or the thing or the course or the, whatever, of what is a great culture. And there wasn't anything out there. There was pieces of it, my 7 pillars, and people have talked about each of these different things in the past, but no one said holistically, here's how you build a great company. They they talked about a lot of different things that weren't specifically the culture. And to your point, maybe they didn't value it as much. No one had thought about taking a broader approach to say, how do you create this larger thing? So after years of reading every book I could read, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books of top people, interviewing top executives. I had a podcast for 10 years. I interviewed thousands of top executives from around the world. And I kept hearing the same things over and over and over again. And these were these 7 pillars. They were repeating it back to me as to, what was key about their organization or why their organization was doing so well. They would name one or more of these 7 things. And when I would go deeper with them, I would discover that they were doing the other 7 as well, or the other, 3 or 4, whatever they hadn't mentioned. And so the best organizations know how to do these 7 things really, really well.
7 things are. I mentioned them at the top, but if you feel like it, go one at a time and go a little bit deeper in those, because I think they're very important.
Yeah. Maybe I'll give you a few, and then I can pause, because otherwise I'll talk for 33 minutes straight here without giving you a chance to respond.
You say whatever you want to say. If I've got a question, I will pop back in.
All right. So the 7 pillars, and they're technically in no particular order, but I always start with transparency as pillar 1, because I find it to be the one that people struggle with the most, the one they're not doing, and it has the most transformative effect on the organization. Telling people how you make your money, what you spend your money on, what everyone's goals are, what the company's goals are, like telling everyone as much as you can possibly tell them about everything, creates much better decision making, gives people clarity and understanding. It removes fear and anxiety. And we had people helping us save money. We had people helping us come up with new product lines. And to my point earlier about no one having any good ideas, it was not because it was a little bit because of the structure, but it was also because they didn't understand the business how I understood the business. So when I started sharing and sharing and sharing, all of a sudden they were like, oh, I didn't know that's how that worked. Well, here's a better way to do that. I worked at this other company. We did it this way. And so transparency is just this fantastic starting point. The next one is positive leadership, or positivity as a pillar. And this is taking on the field of appreciative inquiry, which is positive psychology. And what's interesting is positive psychology ended up proving the exact same thing that neuroscience proved, but they did it in 2 totally different ways. One was observing what was happening in the world, and the other one was observing what's happening in the brain. And they both ended up, like, within weeks of each other, publishing papers and coming up with these great discoveries, that they both essentially came up with the same discovery by doing it in 2 totally different ways, which is, to me, awesome and amazing. And it's basically that, when we're positive, when we look at what's working, when we focus on how to do what we do well better as our first inclination, we are much happier, and then we are able to go and look at where we can improve. But if we run around talking about being problem solvers, and we run around talking about what we need to fix and who's doing what wrong, we go into this state of fear and negativity, and nothing positive comes out. No good ideas come out. So when we start with what's working first, and I don't mean toxic positivity, I don't mean we're pretending that everything's good and everything's, wonderful. That's not it. It's really this idea of we're celebrating and talking about what's good, and we understand that. And that's even goes back to tradition and what's great. But then we use that as a source and a place to safely go and poke at the things that we want to get better at as well. The next one is listening. So great cultures know how to listen and make sure their people feel heard. And whether that's surveys or whether that's talking to people, that means communicating at a high level. When we're transparent and we tell everyone these things, and when they come back and they say, I don't know if that's right, or I think we should change this, or we could do it better this way, that we actually take the time to listen to them, and we show them that we listen and we make changes and improvements. Listening is key. So it's not just for employees. We listen to our customers, we listen to our vendors, we listen to the community. All of the great organizations are great listeners, and they really take advantage of that. The next one is measurement. I certainly learned this one by studying Google. I mean, they measure what they measure. They measure everything. Ultimately, measuring what matters is the most important thing. So if it matters to you that we get back to our customers within 30 seconds, do you measure that? That might be a little bit intense, but like, do you measure that? Is it if it matters that our employees say thank you to each other? Do you measure that? Like, whatever's important to your business, are you actually measuring it? And are you then talking about it? And are you being transparent about the data and all of that? So, organizations that fail tend not to measure things very well. And they're making decisions kind of, shoot from the hip decisions, and they don't really understand what their clients are buying or what their employees care about. And so measurement really helps us make much better decisions by understanding what people really care about. The next one is uniqueness. This is what we ultimately, DE&I and all of that can kind of fit into this category, but it's us celebrating what makes us unique, what makes our employees unique, what makes our customers unique, what makes our product unique. So marketing fits in here as well. And instead of celebrating what makes us the same, I find a lot of people, when they're running on autopilot, and they normally don't do this on purpose, but they tend to focus on what makes us the same. They tend to try to find something in each other that they can recognize. Oh, you went to the same college I went to, or you like the same football team I like, or whatever it is that makes them the same. They can connect on that. But great organizations celebrate what makes people unique, what makes them different and valuable to the organization, or what makes them valuable and different as a client, or whatever it may be. That's super important and really has a huge impact on what they're doing. The next one is mistakes. So great organizations know how to leverage mistakes. Now, not errors. There's a difference between errors and mistakes. Errors are things that we could have avoided. It comes from overwork or improper training, multitasking. That's errors. But mistakes are, I had an idea. I'm going to go try this new thing, and it didn't work. Or we came up with something, we thought this would solve the client's problem, and nope, it didn't. And so do we celebrate that? Do we say, you were brave enough to go try this thing. We appreciate you. Let's talk about why it didn't work. Let's learn from it. And let's figure out how to get the next great option to the client or to fix whatever is going on, and not yell and scream and chastise that person because they didn't come up with the right answer the first time. So some really great examples of this. I have in my book different organizations that really exemplify this. Southwest Airlines does a great job with this. This is why, if you've ever flown on their airplanes, you notice that their staff walks a little differently. They talk a little differently. They're a little bit looser. And that's because the company backs them up. They make a mistake, they're not going to be yelled and screamed at. They may get retrained. They may figure out how to do it better next time, but they're not walking around being scared to say the wrong thing. And then the last one is acknowledgment or recognition. So great organizations have a way to recognize their staff. And I give two clear examples in the book, my book, The Power of Company Culture. One is what I do, and I saw most organizations do, which is just to have a way to say thank you, just to have a formal way that we say thank you to each other that doesn't result in more money or a gift card or anything. It's just a patting somebody on the back. There are examples of organizations that use a very powerful tool to compensate or recognize people with prizes and things like that. And you can do that if you're a big, giant company with like thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. Caesars Entertainment was a case study I put in there, and it does work for them. But for most companies, it's, do we say thank you? Is that a part of our culture? Do we recognize people for their good work? And that's really, really key. So those are the 7 pillars. When people do those well, their company does well.
I mean, it really does. And what happens, and I know you work with a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, what happens when they've got 4 of them and they're really strong, but they may not be aware that the others either don't exist or they're, need to be dusted off and rewritten? Are they reluctant, or they go, oh, missed that, sorry, let's talk about it?
Well, it depends. So there are those organizations, I call them the C plus or D minus organizations, and they don't care. And they're just going to keep going. And maybe they have a good product, or they have a
Right.
something that allows them to continue doing business. But like maybe they do recognition well and they handle mistakes well, but like they're not transparent at all, and they don't really listen. And they're not really that concerned about getting it better. But for those organizations that I call them the B plus, the A minus organizations, and these are, by the way, it's just like when you were in school. If you ever remember, like I always remember all my friends who were A students and B plus students, they had tutors. They were always trying to get a little bit better. They were always bringing in somebody who could help them. They would go and talk to the teacher. They would get extra help. The C plus or C minus students, and they didn't. They were just like happy to just get enough done and to do the minimum and move on to the next class, the next semester. And it's that way with organizations sometimes. But to your point, when I go and I speak, this happens every single time. I have a list, a line of people that want to come and talk to me and tell me about what their organization is struggling with. And they always identify two or three where they're struggling. They're like, we're doing these four or these three really, really well. These two they're okay. We could be better. But wow, these two, we are terrible at these two. We really need to focus on this. So how do we make it happen? How do I get my boss to get better at this? Or, they realize that there are two that they could be better at.
What do you do with them at that point? Do you continue to work with them, or are they, they say, oh, we can do this, we got this, can we come back and talk with you about it later? What happens? Because it would seem to me, this is just me kind of projecting a bit, but it would seem to me that once you have helped them identify where they might be lacking, it would seem to me that they're like, let's do it, let's get it done, let's get this fixed.
It depends. So some organizations, they have they have a good structure where they feel like they can go. They might ask me for a little bit of help or to come in and do a little bit of coaching with them. And some organizations and I think this is the ones that are more the A minus, they're really at the top of their game. They're like, we have identified this as a problem. We've identified that we're going to get better at this, and we need your help, Chris, to go as fast as we can, because we don't want this to be a problem for us any longer. And so I find the ones that bring me in for more of a significant engagement, they are motivated to go fast. Maybe if they realize they haven't been transparent, how do we do that? And how do we change this as much as possible? Because they've learned over the years that when you make big, significant, monumental changes that actually help the business and help employees, that has such a ripple effect on everything. Your sales go up, you keep your employees longer, you keep your customers longer. Things just get better all around. And those kinds of companies understand that. And the small bit of work that it takes and the little bit of money that it takes to make that happen quickly it's a speck of dust in the beach of results that they end up getting.
And I think that so many companies or corporations, Facebook is one. Right now, I wish you could take them over and fix it. What a mess. But it seems to me that people, companies, organizations, small entrepreneurs, small businesses should understand that people will do business that they know, like, and trust, and who they feel safe with. And if we don't know you, like you, or trust you, or we're pretty darn sure you're not going to do us right, we leave. And once we leave, I think that's kind of permanent these days. We don't go back.
Yeah. And it's a good point, because we know this, and yet we do things as organizations that are counter to this. What I mean by that is that maybe the business is struggling a little bit, and so we don't tell people that there's a problem. And we don't tell them that maybe we're struggling with cash flow, or maybe we've lost a big client, or we lost a key employee and we're having a hard time. Instead, we sort of pretend that didn't happen, and then everyone ends up getting kind of crapped on with work and everything. And now the distrust is there. And now then we lose more people and then we have a bigger problem. Instead of saying, hey, this is what happened. These are the issues that we're going to have to deal with. And here's how we think we're going to fix it. If you have other suggestions or comments, we're here to listen. But like, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to solve the problem. And I find that employees, when you tell them openly and honestly what the problem is and what you're going to do about it, that they actually relax. They're like, okay, yeah, you got it. I can go back and keep doing my job. I realize you got it and you're going to, fix it.
And they'll
And
step up. They want to help you. They
right,
really.
right. And sometimes they want to help and sometimes they want to contribute or they have an idea or they know a great person who can come in and fill that role if you lost a key employee or, whatever it is. I mean, they want to help. So when they don't know the answers and they are filled with anxiety and are freaking out, then they just spend their time looking for another job, or complaining and gossiping and creating that kind of cancer inside of a culture that's really hard to remove.
Talking about 2008 and what we're talking about right now of people just saying, I don't trust you anymore. I don't trust the company. I don't trust my coworkers. I went back, I'm in my head, I went back to COVID. So many small companies, and good sized companies just kind of disappeared for a while because they didn't know what to do. And instead of getting on the phone through email and saying, listen, we're struggling with this. We're having internal problems. We're having external problems. We are still here. We're working. Don't give up on us. So many people just didn't do that. And I remember I'm a web developer by trade. And I remember looking at some websites just by happenstance, and I would get in touch with the people and say, I don't see any kind of, I'm going to advise you. It's unsolicited advice, but you need to get out in front of this. You need to let your people know that you're still out there and you're still working and you're still available. Maybe your office is closed, but you can be reached at. And they're like, oh, I didn't even think. They were so panicked that they didn't think that they had a whole bunch of people looking for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, business went down. It didn't stop. I mean, it wasn't, a nuclear bomb didn't go off. It was just that we lost 30 or 40% of our business, which felt completely, obscene. We'd never experienced anything like, well, I guess we had been through 9/11, so we weren't that unused to it. But, you're right. People freaked out and it was like, there was still business to be had. I mean, we went and found the businesses that were hiring. Hiring was part of what we helped people with. And we went and found the businesses that were hiring during a recession. And there were a lot, debt collectors and things like that. There were businesses that were hiring people like crazy. So you had to think about shifting your business in new ways.
COVID, I still hate this word. It just creeped me out then and it does now. Pivot. Just stop using that buzzword. It just
Yeah.
bothered me. But you're right. I mean, if it wasn't working, whatever, restaurants, I mean, they just disappeared off the face of the earth. But there's always something else that you can be doing. There's always, if you calm down enough, something that you can create that will help. But I think that's the trick. Calm down, go within if you have to, do what you did, read, study, study, study. There's always something that you can do. And I think that gets lost in the people. And right now, people, oh, we're going into recession. We may well be. I don't know. But there's always something that you can do. And I believe that with my entire heart.
Yeah, there's always something we can do. And, that's why we need to be transparent and why we need to listen, because we can have an entire, let's say you have 50 people in your company, you got 50 people doing 50 different things, and that's probably not going to help either. We need to be focused. We need to be sure that we're trying the right experiments or the right things first. I mean, to your point, back in 2008, when we were trying different things, the first couple things we tried and who we went after didn't work. And we had to be open and honest about what the results were and where we were seeing good results and where we weren't. And we had to keep making those changes and keep, reiterating that new approach to try to get, how are we going to fill that business that we had lost with those other companies. So it's a good reminder.
Things don't just go away. COVID still has impact. 2008 still has impact. I live in the deep south. I'm really 40 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. And when 2008 came along, I remember seeing bumper stickers on the back of pickup trucks. Last person out of Louisiana, turn off the lights. It was
Yeah.
bad. It was really bad. Our oil field production just tanked, as you can imagine. It was awful. But they found other ways to do business. Most of them are still here.
Yeah, it was a lot of resilient times for people. I mean,
Yeah, it's going to
I've,
happen again. We're not static. Humans are not static. Life is not static. You need to be prepared.
yeah, absolutely.
You were talking about the impact of culture on performance and productivity. Do you have some real world applications and success stories from your book?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly so my own business's success from making these changes is kind of the guiding story in the book. But I do bring in lots of different case studies from VaynerMedia, which is Gary Vaynerchuk's company, to NASA, to Neiman Marcus, Rubio's, which is a Mexican fast food joint. I don't know if they have those in the South, but pretty popular in the West Coast. Southwest Airlines, and many others. There's some great examples of when we do something um, really, really well. We do one of these 7 pillars really, really well, especially when it's something that maybe we were struggling with. Um, it's great. You know, I use Southwest Airlines as there's sort of 2 examples that really stand out to me. The first one is around mistakes, and I mentioned this a little earlier, but if a employee of Southwest Airlines ends up doing the wrong thing, but they were ultimately trying to do the right thing, they believe they were doing the right thing for the client, the airline will back them up no matter what. You will never see that at the Southwest Airlines say anything negative about that employee in the public realm, in the press or anything. They will defend the employee. They will help the employee and do everything they can to make the situation right for the employee and the customer. Privately, they may go back and retrain. They may talk about how they could do it better, but they're never going to hang that person out to dry. And that is a reason why the employees feel safe and why you get great staff there, and you get people that are, they tell funny jokes and they act silly a little bit sometimes. And people enjoy riding. If you're going to ride a low cost airline, then I think Southwest is the one you're going to choose because you have a good experience. There's also a really funny example from their owner, and I'm just blanking on his name right now, but you can look this story up. The owner was sort of this big charismatic guy, and I guess when they decided to start Southwest Airlines, they had done all of the searching. They had looked and made sure that that could be the name of the airline. And after a bit of time, it was discovered that technically some little tiny airline in one little airport actually owned that name. And they had done their best to make sure that done all their due diligence. And this is long before the internet, long before sophistication of computers and things like that. But there was now a legal battle over the name Southwest Airlines. And so what do? We made a mistake. We did our best. We tried our best. And it turns out it wasn't right. So do you fire the person who was supposed to do that? Do you yell and scream? Do you go to court and fight this and spend, millions of dollars on legal fees? Well, what he did was he went and contacted the company and said, hey, listen, why don't we work this out and try to in a fun way? And so he challenged them in the press to an arm wrestling match for the name.
I have never heard this story, but
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. So he challenges them to an arm wrestling match, and they decide to accept. And so leading up to that, because this gentleman was such a character, he kept doing new things to get more attention in the press. And it was really getting, it was a big story. And so finally the day comes when it's time to go home and arm wrestle, and he comes in wearing a sling or something like this. And I'm getting the story perfectly right, but saying his arm wasn't, he couldn't do it. And so he needed to bring in a substitute. And of course, that substitute was like, a wrestler. It was like one of those WWE or WWF wrestlers was going to come in and take his place. And of course, that made a big splash. And that was, the reporters were all there taking pictures and writing stories and all of that. He ended up doing the arm wrestling match. And he ended up, the other people ended up winning, the small little company. Now, they had gotten so much press and they had gotten so much good attention, and their company had gotten more, orders and activity and things that they could have ever gotten out of this little thing, that they end up giving the name to the now Southwest Airlines company, and they changed their name because this was an absolute win for them. This was an absolute media blitz, and their company grew, and everyone. So we created a new situation that ended up being better for everyone. And we ended up leveraging and celebrating this mistake instead of going to court, yelling and screaming and turning it into a negative. So this is where how we deal with mistakes is really, really key, right? Now, maybe we're not all going to turn this into a media event every time something happens in the company, but you can find positive ways. You can find ways to really turning it into a learning exercise. I'm sure that people remember that story for years and years and years internally, and they were much more diligent, and they really made sure when they, did stuff with compliance and all that they were really, really sure, because I'm sure they remembered all of that, right? Without anybody ever yelling and screaming or firing anybody or anyone losing their job.
Started telling that story, I was thinking, apparently incorrectly, that he just went and bought him out. This was much better. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. I'm going to have to go look that up. I had not heard of that. So current challenges in the workplace culture. What are your thoughts on contemporary issues like remote work, which I have been remote working for 20 years. You can't hire me to sit in somebody's office. I am unemployable, and it's by design. But after COVID, it became kind of almost mandatory, didn't it? So what are your thoughts on remote work, and hybrid models, and honestly, the recent employee engagement crisis? We hear a lot about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that we did when we were coming out of that change in 2009, we decided to go 100% remote. And we did it just to save money in the beginning. That was one of our ideas on how we could, where could we increase sales, but where could we save money? And it just so happened that the lease was coming up on the building and we could save a lot of money. And we ended up not having to lay anybody off by taking on that change. Now, I intended it to be temporary. After 2 weeks, every employee had called me and said, please don't ever make us go back in the office. I love working from home. This is fantastic. And I was like, that's interesting. Okay. It's kind of one of those things you didn't expect to hear. You didn't expect people to be so happy. So for many years, we were running remote and never told anybody. It was a kind of a secret because it wasn't a cool thing to do back then. And so I ended up writing a book on how to have a remote company, and that came out right as the pandemic happened. It was dumb luck on my part. And so if you're interested on how to run a fully remote company or hybrid company, I've got the instruction manual as well for that. But we've seen, a whole lot of people, the most amount of people did remote work that we've ever had in the modern sense of it, maybe post-industrial revolution here. And that's really, really important because there was a democratization of this. We would allow executives and salespeople to be out in the field and work remotely or work hybrid, but we made everybody else come in the office. And so suddenly when we extended that benefit to them, albeit because of a pandemic, they got to show that they could do it. They got to experience it and enjoy it, figure out if they liked it or not. And for some companies and some jobs, it didn't work and they needed to come back in. And for some, their managers are just so frail and unconfident that they made them come back anyways. But for a lot of companies, they've kept it. They've kept hybrid, they've kept remote. And so now post-pandemic, we still have the most remote work we've ever seen if you remove the pandemic time when it was sort of mandated. Now that people are free to choose, we have a really huge, significant amount of the workforce that can take advantage of this, which is so important. I mean, people can stay home with a sick kid and not need to take a sick day for themselves and still get their work done and still be productive for the company. People can not have to drive in on Fridays when maybe traffic is absolutely horrendous, right? And that just saves their mental aggravation and keeps them from burning out and hating their job and all of that. So, and we know that they're more productive in that way. Now, there's still importance in being together and having those moments sometimes, but this is really the next part of work changing. So when you look at flexibility and we look at AI, all of these things are creating some really significant change. And the only thing that's holding it back, especially in America, is the government's inability to make changes quickly to compliance and to laws and to help this flourish in a much healthier way. We still have a lot of old rules and old things on the books that really aren't in alignment with some of these new changes. And the wheels of change move slowly, and especially when you're talking about government agencies and things like that. But if that's kind of the next big thing that's got to really change if we're going to see another big wave of improvement for employees as it relates to these things.
And we keep talking, I keep going back to COVID in 2008. I lived through both of them. We all did. And things that people were absolutely panicking about then turned out not to be all that panicable. I know that's not a real word, but once they calmed down and said, oh, this kind of works, we were finding that people were moving out of very expensive rentals because they no longer had to be in New York City, for example, and they were able to save money by going to one of the, go to New Jersey, go somewhere else where it's a lot cheaper and work remotely. They're much happier people.
Yeah. And I personally believe that this is helpful, at least for America, in that it's not necessarily so great that we have everybody in, several cities. Why do we have such high population density in cities? And a lot of it was because that's where the jobs were.
Right. Where the buildings were. That's
The
exactly
buildings
right.
are, where the jobs are. And so if
Yeah.
we can change that and allow people to live in other great parts of our country, and if they don't want to live in a big city, and that's not, what really works with their brain, but they were doing it because they had to survive. There's a lot of great places in the world for people to live, and why not be able to do that and still have great work and, and enjoy your life and raise your family where and how you want to.
So, in your opinion, Chris, what is the importance of leadership in cultivating and maintaining a positive company culture? I guess what I'm really asking is what makes an effective leader and how can they inspire their teams to embrace these cultural values, whether it's remote, whatever it is? I mean, I'm sure you have some examples. So, can you share one or two?
Well, it's to be very, very clear about what your culture is. Um, and hopefully people like it and they want to work for you. I mean, you can be very clear that your culture is something that is toxic and doesn't work, but be very, very clear. If you look at Amazon, you look at Facebook, you look at Google, you look at Uber, you look at, some of these other really big examples, their cultures are very clearly defined. We can talk about what each of them are. It is, you as someone who's never worked a day in your life can understand and know what it's going to be like because of the stories and things that we can read and the things that we can figure out of what their culture is going to be like. And their cultures are very different. They still operate, they still have these 7 pillars, but they're very, very different. And how, much like I always give the example, there's not one good way to raise a kid. Yet there are some basic truths that we know the things that must happen for kids to grow up and be healthy and happy and good members of society. And yet we know we went to our friend's house, how their parents parented them was very different, that their households operated differently than ours did. And yet our friends still turned out to be, healthy individuals that went up and did great things and had families themselves and all of that. So there isn't like one way to implement it. Just the same thing with culture. So it's being very clear about who you are and what's important, and then making sure that we are being transparent about it, we're listening to our people, and that we're willing to improve, we're willing to get better over time.
You mentioned your books. Can you give us a list of the books and where to find them?
Sure. So find them on Amazon or wherever you buy books. So the latest book is The Power of Company Culture, second edition, where we added really almost double the book, added those big case studies with VaynerMedia and NASA and Neiman Marcus. If you're interested in the remote work book, it's just called Remote Work. With my co-author Kim Shepard, and she started her remote company in like 2002. So she was doing it long before I was, and we came together to kind of spill all of our secrets. So if you're interested in the books, great. You can pick them up there. If you would like a free PDF that has, I don't know, I've got a list of questions you can ask your staff, different meeting types that might be interesting for you to think about driving better culture. You can text 33777 and just put in my name, Chris, and it'll automatically send you that PDF once you provide your information. And I'm happy to send that out to anybody for free who wants it, and as well as connecting on LinkedIn or wherever people hang out.
Do me a favor and give us that number again.
Text 33777, and then for the message, you just type in Chris, CHRIS.
Before I have to reluctantly let you go, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, thanks so much for having me on today. It's been a blast.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. I've been taking notes like crazy. I've got 2 pages of notes. And I knew talking with you in the pre-interview that this was going to be fascinating, and thank you. So for our audience, thank you for joining us today as we explored the insights of Chris Dyer, a leading expert in company culture and remote work. We discussed his transformative 7-pillar strategy, which focuses on transparency. Write these down. Transparency, listening, positivity, acknowledgement, measurement, uniqueness, and learning from mistakes. And Chris shared how these pillars can enhance performance and productivity, along with some real-world success stories from organizations that have implemented these strategies. So as we navigate the challenges of modern workplace culture, Chris helped us understand the crucial role of leadership in fostering a positive environment and adapting to the future of work. Write that down too, because it's changing, especially with the rise of AI, artificial intelligence. So be sure to connect with him online. And if you enjoyed this conversation and found it valuable, please take a moment to leave us an Apple review. And why? Because your feedback helps me continue to bring you insightful content and inspiring guests. Chris, thank you so much. I've really appreciated your time here.
Thank you.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.